Hey guys, tonight we're slipping behind the golden curtains of the Byzantine Empire not to meet an emperor or hear a war cry, but to follow a quiet procession that no one really wants to be in. It begins not with trumpets, but with fabric, thick, layered, perfumed, and heavy. Tonight, you are the bride, not any bride, a noble woman, which means your beauty, your virtue, your lineage, and your silence are all part of a currency being exchanged. Here's something no one mentions in history class. Byzantine weddings were so ritualized, so soaked in silent tension, that some women cried not after the ceremony, but before the procession even began. Not from sadness, from knowing. And once you see how the ritual unfolds, you'll understand why they feared the wedding more than the marriage itself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is, especially if you're hiding under 3 layers of blankets like our bride. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit still on the edge of a cushion, spine straight not by choice, but by centuries of posture drilled into your bones through etiquette tutors and nuns who whispered that a bent back revealed a bent will. The women around you bustle in silence, older cousins, dry-eyed aunts, a servant who smells faintly of vinegar and rosewater. They adjust your veils in layers, first the innermost, a soft linen that presses down your hair like snow on a spring garden, then heavier silks, embroidered with a gold thread so delicate it catches the candlelight like whispers. They murmur little encouragements that feel less like comfort and more like ritual phrases handed down from woman to woman, like old curses disguised as blessings. You're told you look lovely, and that loveliness will help, but you know it's not the kind that matters. You're not the one who gets to look tonight. You haven't seen your groom yet today. That's not unusual. You might have glimpsed him at a feast, watched his nose twitch at the oily lamb, maybe overheard his brother joke about his love for figs and other soft, clinging things. Or maybe he's a name only Demetrios, Theophilos, Nikephoros picked by your father in a quiet agreement over wine and documents signed by men whose hands never touched a bridal veil. Historians still argue whether noble women in Byzantium had any real say in their betrothals. Some point to a few rare letters of resistance or clever political maneuvers by empresses. Others insist that autonomy was just a lovely illusion, like the jewels sewn into your sleeves, glimmering with meaning, but unable to move. You catch your own reflection in the polished brass plate someone carelessly left on the table. You almost laugh. Your face is barely visible beneath the veil, and yet your eyes look like they're waiting for someone to call them back to life. You blink, and nothing changes. A chill brushes your nape. The windows have been shuttered since dawn, not for the weather, but to keep out the city's gaze. It's tradition. They say modesty before majesty. But really, it's about control. If they see you too soon, the magic breaks. The bride is meant to be revealed like a sacred icon, slowly, reverently, and at the proper time, not a moment before. They begin fastening your girdle now, a thick band of velvet wrapped tightly around your waist. It's not for beauty, it's symbolic. It represents chastity. Of course, Byzantines loved symbols that choked. The knot they tie at your left hip will not be undone by your hands. Later, in a chamber you haven't seen yet, that knot will be his to release. There's a joke somewhere in that, but no one dares say it aloud. Still, one of the older maids grunts while tightening the belt and mutters, "Hope he's not drunk tonight." You want to laugh, but it comes out like a sigh and dissolves into the thick incense curling up from the bronze brazier. Frankincense, always frankincense, because even fear should smell holy. Outside the chamber, the procession is being arranged. You can hear the clatter of silver-plated shields, the high keening of the aulos, a reed instrument that somehow always sounds like it's mourning something. The pages are lining up. Your dowry has been packed into gilded trunks and is now being paraded on the backs of mules and the shoulders of servants, each item catalogued and watched. Embroidered linens, chalices, land deeds, a small reliquary box containing a saint's tooth that your great-grandmother supposedly wept beside during childbirth. None of it feels like yours. All of it is now part of the exchange. The dowry procession will leave before you. It's meant to announce you. It also, conveniently, distracts the crowd from staring at your face too soon. A nun appears at the doorway. You've never seen her before, but she wears the dark robes of the Pantocrator convent, and her presence means only one thing: the moment is near. She approaches without speaking, places a cold cross into your hands, and pulls your veil down over your eyes. Not enough to blind, just enough to make you guess where the floor ends. "Hold the cross," she murmurs, "and keep your steps even. If you fall, they'll say it was a sign." You nod, mouth dry. Byzantine superstition clings to every fold of the wedding. If a candle sputters, if a mule rears, if the bride stumbles, every little omen becomes court gossip by morning. You've seen it happen. You once heard about a noblewoman who sneezed 3 times on her way to the altar. Her husband annulled the marriage within a year, said it was a sign of weakness, said she would birth ghosts, not sons. The drums begin, deep, slow, echoing. They don't feel celebratory. They feel funereal. You rise. 2 handmaidens take your arms. Not for support, heavens no. For symmetry. You must be balanced, harmonious. The bride is an offering, not a person. Offerings don't fidget. You begin to walk, slowly. Each step deliberate and silent despite the chaos outside. In your ears, the sound distorts like the city is underwater. You hear bursts of applause, children calling, the clink of coin pouches being shaken. Some people toss coins at brides as they pass, a superstition meant to ensure fertility. Others whisper prayers. A few men shout cheeky things, and their wives slap their arms in warning. The streets may celebrate, but not for you, for the spectacle, for what you represent, for the hope that your womb will carry an heir, and your silence will maintain peace between 2 powerful houses. The veils begin to itch, not physically, but mentally. You begin to wish you could scratch off this entire skin, this performance, this identity, this careful, curated role you didn't audition for, but now must perform perfectly. A sudden thought crosses your mind. What would happen if you turned around, walked the other way, ran, but the thought is barely born, before it's smothered by the drums? One misstep, and you become her, the mad bride, the fallen girl, the ghost in the story. There's always one. The palace gates loom ahead. The light dims slightly as the courtyard swallows you, its high marble walls echoing your footsteps back at you like questions. Inside the great hall, they're waiting. Your father, expression locked in marble. Your groom, hopefully sober. The patriarch, eyes half-lidded, muttering the liturgy under his breath. You take a breath, smell the oil of ancient stone and frankincense again. Your hand tightens around the cross. It's cold. The knot at your hip feels heavier. Your name is already beginning to fade. You won't be you much longer. You don't remember when the idea of marriage stopped being about love and started being about geography. You're not marrying a man tonight. You're stitching 2 regions together, sealing a treaty that was never written down in your language. You're a living signature, a portable border. The Byzantines believed deeply in divine order. Every wall, every relic, every wedding was arranged like a mosaic. But if you tilt your head just right, you start to notice the missing pieces. No one asks if you want to belong to him. They ask if your bloodline is suitable, if your fertility is likely, if your virtue is unblemished. You might as well be a reliquary, beautiful on the outside, filled with something precious, unseen, and constantly doubted. Historians still argue whether noblewomen in Byzantium were pawns or participants. Some say they played subtle power games, manipulating from behind veils and fans. Others argue that these women were locked into gold leaf cages, only able to chirp sweetly or be ignored entirely. Either way, the palace walls don't echo your voice, they just absorb it. You've been taught the choreography your entire life. How to bow your head the precise angle when addressed by an elder. How to hold your veil just so when approaching an icon. How to smile just enough to appear serene, but not enough to seem bold. It's a narrow path you walk, and tonight, the path is literal. Red carpets laid out across the marble tiles of the Magnara Hall create an aisle so vibrant it feels like you're walking on dried blood. That might be your imagination, Or it might be your grandmother's voice in your head again. She used to say, "A woman's wedding day is the last day she walks in her own shoes." Tonight, you're wearing shoes embroidered in gold and weighted with pearls. They pinch, they hurt, they make you glide, not walk. Not because you want to float, but because you're afraid of falling. The chamber behind you closes with a soft metallic clang. The veil muffles your hearing, but you hear the scrape of guards shifting, the creak of gilded doors locking, and the soft whisper of a servant counting your dowry crates under her breath. Not for theft. Of course, everything is being watched. You're watched too, by eyes pretending not to watch. Eyes that slide past you and then return to linger on your form beneath the layers. You wonder what they see. A bride, a bribe, a future empress, or a very temporary consort. The line is always thin in Byzantium, and thinner for women. He waits at the altar. Well, not exactly an altar. It's more of a symbolic dais flanked by frescoes depicting saints with unreadable expressions. The frescoes are chipped, like even the saints got bored of watching this same ritual 100 times. You pause at the foot of the platform. You're not allowed to look up yet. The music has stopped, and now it's time for the formal vows. Not your vows. His. Yours are murmured later, in private, and barely above a whisper. They're not even recorded in official documents because your promises are assumed. You promise everything by showing up in the first place. They lift your veil for just a moment. It's a test. He sees you now. This is the moment where, theoretically, he could protest, call off the union, declare some divine disapproval, but that never happens. Not because brides are perfect, but because politics don't permit spontaneity. He says nothing, and you feel the weight of being approved settle like a warm, sour cloth across your shoulders. You've passed the test, or at least not failed it in public. Your face is covered again. You're now sanctified by absence. Your father doesn't speak. He simply steps back, hands folded behind his back. You don't need him anymore. Not here, not visibly. Your family has done its duty. You are no longer theirs. You're a message, delivered and sealed. Later, he'll drink to your health at a banquet where men slap each other's backs and make toast after toast while you sit quietly beside your new husband, nibbling at honey-soaked almonds and listening to metaphors about harvests and wombs. But for now, he vanishes behind the curtain like a magician's assistant who knows not to overstay his moment. You kneel, not because you're required to, but because it's expected. This is the moment that girls in cloisters dream about, the moment embroidered on tapestries, painted onto chalices where bride and groom are joined under the gaze of heaven and empire. But it feels more like a branding. The priest places a gold-embroidered sash across your joined hands. The choir begins to chant. The same song it always is monotonal, ancient, beautiful in the way ruins are beautiful. Your knees ache. You wonder how many women before you knelt in this same spot. Did they tremble? Did they feel pride? Or just a distant nausea that settled in the pit of the stomach and never quite went away? Outside, the feast begins before the ceremony ends. That's always how it is. The people celebrate a marriage long before the bride has even said yes. You're expected to smile. Your lips ache from holding it. Your cheeks have gone numb. You realize your face is doing things your heart can't feel. But that's the secret no one says aloud. Byzantine nobility values composure above all. Feelings are allowed, but only when no one important is watching. Or, more accurately, only when everyone is watching, but too polite to comment. You walk now beside your husband, who smells faintly of cloves and olive oil. His hand hovers near yours, but never quite touches. That will come later. For now, distance is elegance. The nobles gathered on either side bow slightly. You pass through a tunnel of judgment lined with gold, velvet, and forced pleasantries. Women nod with unreadable expressions. Some of them were brides once. Some still are, decades later. You wonder if they remember this part. You hope not. One offers you a tiny embroidered pouch, a gift. It's customary. You smile and accept it. Inside is a sprig of basil, a symbol of royalty. Yes, but also of mourning. That's the kind of duality Byzantium thrives on. Every joy is tinged with dread. Every ritual is a rehearsal for something darker. You grip the pouch a little tighter, as if it could anchor you. The procession continues through the corridors of the palace. Each step you take leads you away from your past, into a room you didn't choose, a role you didn't write. You see icons staring down at you from niches in the marble walls, saints with eyes that look both loving and disappointed, their hands raised in blessing, or perhaps warning. You wonder if they were ever married. You doubt it. Eventually, the corridor opens onto a smaller courtyard lit by floating lanterns and moonlight. The air is cooler here. You let yourself exhale, quietly, so no one hears. The stars above twinkle like gossip, sparkling, constant, distant. A few noblemen light incense cones and place them along the path ahead of you. The smoke curls up, mixing with the scent of your own perfume, heavy with jasmine and myrrh. Your husband pauses and turns slightly. You don't meet his eyes, not because you're afraid, but because it's not yet time. Timing is everything here. One glance too soon and the illusion cracks. At the threshold of your new wing, the women's quarter, you pause again. This is where they say goodbye. The music fades behind you. The crowd thins. Your footsteps echo now. You are escorted by eunuchs, soft-voiced and swift. They speak in riddles and half-prayers. One adjusts your veil. Another opens the door. Inside, the room glows with golden candlelight, but no warmth. This is your new home. You've never seen it before today. You stand in the center while women move around you like shadows. They undress you layer by layer, not sexually, not cruelly, but ritualistically, as if peeling back the identity of your girlhood one piece at a time. Your wedding dress is folded and removed. Your veil is placed over an icon. Your shoes, those cursed, gilded shoes, are set beside the hearth and never worn again. You're handed a different garment now, one that smells of lavender and expectation. You sit on the edge of a silk-draped bed. No one speaks. They all leave. The door shuts. Silence settles. And it's not the peaceful kind. You shift slightly on the edge of the bed, careful not to wrinkle the fine embroidery beneath your thighs. Linen woven so tightly it sighs with every motion. The silence doesn't cradle you. It stretches, pulls, tightens like the girdle they took off earlier. But this one wraps around your chest. No more whispers, no more incense, no more music from the street. Just you and the echo of footsteps long faded. A soft breeze crawling through the carved window screen, and the faint scent of dried lemon peels scattered in the corners for luck. You don't feel lucky. You feel staged, like an artifact placed in a museum before the curator has explained what it means. Outside, somewhere beyond these walls, fireworks are being released over the Bosphorus, but you hear nothing but the soft creak of candle wax dripping into its own puddle. The gold sandals pinching your feet earlier have been replaced with bearskin on cold stone. You glance at the hearth, where the shoes rest like little prisoners, polished, hollow, and abandoned. You wonder how long it will take for you to feel the same way. They always said the bride's walk was the last time she moved freely. That was the joke. If you could still laugh, you might. The truth is, even that walk was not yours. You were moved, like furniture across polished floors, like a chess piece placed into a dangerous corner. They dressed you in silk, but you never chose the color. They crowned you in garlands, but you never picked the flowers. You rehearsed the steps for months, but never wrote the script. And now, sitting here, you realize how thoroughly you've been carried. Marriage, for noble women in Byzantium, was not a door you stepped through. It was a curtain that dropped behind you before you even knew the act had started. Historians still debate whether the weight of this transition was felt by the women themselves, or only written about in hindsight. Some letters remain, tucked away in imperial archives, sad. Lyrical complaints about cloisters and cold husbands. Others insist these women embraced their roles with grace. You suspect the truth was quieter than either version, most just adapted, because what else could they do? The chamber door creaks open. He enters, not with fanfare, just the hush of soft shoes and the brief waft of wine on his breath. He doesn't look at you right away. Instead, he closes the door with deliberate gentleness, like he's afraid of startling something. Maybe you, maybe himself. His robes rustle as he walks toward the table. You watch him pour himself a drink from the silver jug, an expensive vintage. You assume, Because you remember hearing your father mention it during one of the dowry negotiations. Everything is ceremonial tonight, even the wine. He drinks in silence, then finally turns to look at you. It's not romantic. There's no spark, no electricity, no trembling fingers reaching out across the candlelight. Just two strangers looking at each other across a shared fate. His expression is neutral, unreadable, not cruel, not kind, just duty-bound. You see his hand twitch slightly, like he wants to say something but can't quite decide which script to follow. You're not frightened, but you're not comfortable either. You wonder if he sees you as a person or just the sum of your lineage, your dowry, your ability to produce heirs. There are no real introductions. You already know his name. He already knows yours. Still, neither of you says it out loud. It's too intimate. He walks towards you slowly. You keep your gaze steady, but your hands grip the edge of the cushion beneath you. This part of the evening is never mentioned aloud. It's hinted at in sideways glances, in smirks from older maids, in the vague warnings of your aunt who once said, "Just remember, he's not the first man who's been nervous. It was meant to comfort you. It didn't." You've heard stories, whispers pass through bathhouses and behind tapestries of brides who cried, who froze, who fainted, of grooms who drank too much or not enough. You've never heard a story where it was perfect. He sits beside you. You both stare ahead for a moment, at the candlelight dancing on the far wall. Then, in a surprisingly soft voice, he says something about the feast. The musicians were good. The guests were loud. The basil stuffed lamb was dry. You nod politely. He says he didn't get to see you before the procession. You nod again. The silence stretches, but it's not unbearable. Just uncertain. Like both of you are waiting for a cue that hasn't arrived. When he finally reaches for your hand, it's a slow, tentative movement, not forceful, not unkind, just rehearsed. The ritual has begun again, this time in a new room. You're no longer the bride in procession. Now you are the wife in waiting. That shift isn't marked by bells or prayers, but by the closing of a door and the dimming of the lights. He removes the last pins from your hair. You sit still, not out of fear, but out of habit. You were trained to be still. He undoes the knot at your hip, the one the nun warned you about. It comes loose more easily than you expected. The gown slips off your shoulder. The candle flickers. Your mind wanders. You think about the other women who went through this. The girl you met at the convent who was married off at 14. The cousin who disappeared into her husband's estate and was never seen at court again. The aunt who whispered too much and ended up quietly sent to a monastery. You wonder where they are tonight. You wonder if they remember the weight of that first touch, not because it was sacred, but because it marked the moment you stopped belonging to yourself. And yet, here's the strange part. Even in the tension, even in the rigid choreography of this night, there's something oddly human about it. He looks tired. You feel tired. And for a fleeting second, you realize he might be just as trapped as you are. Different chains, maybe, but chains nonetheless. You're both fulfilling a pattern older than memory, older than empire, and neither of you knows how to step outside of it. The night stretches on, slow and quiet. You lie down eventually, side by side, not touching, not yet. There's a sense that everything has already happened, even if nothing has. The candles have burned low, the incense has faded. Somewhere, faintly, you hear the clatter of plates being cleared from the feast. Life continues. Servants whisper in the halls. Someone laughs. Someone cries. The palace breathes around you. You close your eyes, not to sleep, but to pause, to find a still place in your mind where your name still echoes in your own voice. You imagine the streets you walked earlier, the drum beats, the petals thrown at your feet, the whispered prayers. You think of the gold sandals resting by the hearth, and you wonder if they miss your feet already. You think about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days that will unfold in this same gilded rhythm. Outside, the moon hangs low over the city. Constantinople gleams like a jewel in the night, utterly unaware of the quiet chamber behind its palace walls. In the darkness, Two people lie side by side, uncertain, uncomfortable, and unchosen. And yet, for tonight at least, they breathe the same air. The procession is over. The silence has begun, and you wonder, not for the first time, how long you can survive a life where your name is no longer yours, your path no longer your own, and your only escape is sleep. You wake before the bells, not because someone stirs you, but because the air itself feels unfamiliar, thick with a quiet that doesn't belong to sleep, but to anticipation. The fabric of the pillows smells different, not like your mother's lavender or the beeswax soap used in your old room, but like rosewood, citrus, and something metallic you can't name. Your limbs ache not from exertion, but from the way you curled them in sleep, as though trying to make yourself small enough to disappear. The bed is wide, the sheets smooth, but you feel like a guest in your own skin. You sit up slowly, brushing the curtain of your hair aside, and blink toward the soft shimmer of light spilling through a carved lattice. Birds sing faintly in the courtyard beyond, mocking, perhaps in their casual freedom. Your husband is already gone, leaving behind only the folded corner of the bed where he lay. He didn't say goodbye, or maybe he did, but you were too deeply buried in exhausted dreams to notice. Either way, the room feels no different with him gone, just colder. You rise, feet touching the mosaic floor, and find your wedding robe neatly folded at the edge of a low divan. It's been replaced with a new garment, a softer, darker robe, with stitched edging that signals your new status. A Kyria now, a lady. A title bestowed not for anything you've done, but simply for surviving the night. That's the irony, isn't it? You spend your entire girlhood preparing for a wedding that lasts only a day, only to wake and discover you've been reborn into something you never truly wanted, a role without rehearsal. The rules haven't changed, but the stakes have, now. Every step you take will be watched not for grace, but for failure. You're no longer the hopeful bride. You're the wife of someone powerful. The expectations are endless. A knock at the door, not a servant too soft. It's a maid assigned to your new household. You don't recognize her, but she doesn't introduce herself. She bows slightly and offers a tray, honeyed figs, barley bread, a cup of water with a single sprig of mint. You haven't spoken yet today, and your voice feels like it might crack from disuse. So you nod. She leaves. It's not conversation that's expected. It's acceptance. She'll be the first of many women to enter this room without ever asking what you want. They come to maintain you, to guard your softness, to dress you in armor made of silk and powder. You eat slowly, chewing the bread like it might betray you. The figs are too sweet, the water too cold, but you finish it all. That's what you do now. By mid-morning, the corridor outside begins to hum. Eunuchs walk by, carrying scrolls and folded garments. Somewhere nearby, a lute plays soft, melancholic, the kind of music you'd hear at funerals, not feasts. You dress as instructed, with the help of a woman who doesn't look you in the eye. She cinches the belt a little too tightly and doesn't apologize. You notice, but don't protest, because today is the dowry review. Yes, even after the wedding, they count it all again, formality, of course, but also suspicion. Did your family exaggerate the value of those silver chalices? Were the linens really from Syria? Is the reliquary authentic? You're not expected to speak during the review. You're expected to sit, with your hands folded on your lap and your eyes lowered, as if your body itself is proof of your worth. The dowry room is smaller than the reception hall, but it feels more dangerous, because here, your worth is unwrapped. Each item removed from its crate, inspected, sniffed, weighed, questioned. You sit on a low stool while old men with fat fingers lift delicate fabrics with the air of inspecting a merchant's stock. There's no reverence, no poetry, just ledgers and nods and small noises of approval or skepticism. You wonder how they appraise you. Not directly, of course, but you know the unspoken math. A bride with a rich dowry buys more leniency. One with flaws in her trousseau. Her flaws become visible too. A cracked goblet becomes a sign of instability. A scuffed mirror, a bad omen. Historians often wonder if Byzantine women believed in these things, or merely performed them. You know the answer, you believe whatever helps you survive. Among the goods is a carved wooden chest painted with red ochre and rimmed in bronze, your favorite. Once, it belonged to your grandmother. You remember watching her hide letters in it. You'd hoped it would be placed in your new chambers, but now it's here, open for inspection like a patient on a table. Inside are ivory combs, a pair of embroidered gloves, and a little book of psalms handwritten in faded ink. One of the older men lifts the book with disinterest, flicks the pages, then tosses it back in. You blink, you don't flinch. You're not allowed to, but inside, something sours. These were supposed to be symbols of your past, your bloodline. Instead, they're reduced to line items on a list. The ceremony ends with silence. No applause, no final pronouncement, just a nod from a steward and the quiet clunk of boxes being resealed. You rise, not dismissed, exactly more like completed. You are a contract now, fulfilled and filed away. You return to your chambers, shoes clicking softly on the mosaic floor. Each step echoes. You wonder if the walls remember other brides who walked this path. You wonder if they, too, felt the weight of being known only through their possessions. You pass a fresco on your way back St. Thecla, with her hand raised in blessing. You used to pray to her when you were younger. You want to now, but your mouth stays closed. Your prayers today are not meant to be heard. In your chamber, a new dress waits, darker fabric, longer sleeves, a symbol, again, of your new station. You'll wear it to visit your mother-in-law. Another ritual, another evaluation. The visit is meant to solidify your place, but everyone knows it's another performance. You're walking into a room where power shifts behind fans and scented oils, where women speak in compliments that bleed like paper cuts, where every glance is a verdict. You dress slowly, with the help of a maid who silently braids your hair into a crown so tight your temples throb. She pins in pearls, delicate, sharp, too close to your scalp. When you look in the mirror, you see someone who could be royalty or a hostage. It's hard to tell. You descend the hall again, now flanked by two older women, your new attendants. They don't smile. They walk beside you like guards, not companions. The hall is longer than you remembered, the light colder. The portraits on the walls watch you differently now, as if they finally recognize you. You're no longer passing through. You belong here now, whether you like it or not. The reception chamber is warm, too warm, heavy with rose-scented incense. Your mother-in-law sits at the head of the room, flanked by other noble women. She wears red. She doesn't rise. You curtsy deeply, perfectly. She nods. You've passed the first test. Conversation flows around you like a current you're not allowed to interrupt. They talk of harvests, of plague rumors, of a bishop who misquoted the Psalms. You sit quietly, hands folded, smiling just enough. Occasionally, someone addresses you, always with a soft, sharp tone. And how are you adjusting? Dear, did you sleep well? Is the wing to your liking? You answer with grace. Nothing more. No opinions. No truths. Just what is safe. One woman leans in and murmurs, "You carry yourself well," like someone who's watched carefully. You thank her and wonder if she meant it kindly, or as a warning. When the visit ends, you are praised for your poise. They tell your husband you were dignified, that you listened, that you're a suitable Kyria. He nods approvingly, as if he expected nothing less, and perhaps he didn't. But as the sun sets and you're escorted back to your rooms, you feel something inside you begin to hollow. Not break, just make space. You're learning. This life requires a different kind of strength. Not loud, not bold, but enduring, unblinking, like stone beneath silk. You sit by the window as the last light fades. The city glows below you, and the sea murmurs in the distance. You imagine someone walking along the docks, free, unobserved, wind in their hair. You almost envy them, but envy is dangerous now. You turn away. The maid returns with another tray, the same figs, the same mint. You eat them slowly, carefully, because here, even dinner is performance. The next morning begins not with sunlight, but with sound soft drums echoing from somewhere beyond your chambers, rising slowly like a tide. They don't come for you directly, but they pull at your mind, tugging you out of a half-dream where you were still walking through the procession, veil slipping, feet dragging, surrounded by faces without eyes. You blink awake to find the real world isn't so different. Outside your windows, banners flutter in the breeze, gold and crimson, embroidered with imperial sigils, and somewhere below, the sound of hooves and trumpets begins to bleed into the morning air. A wedding procession, again, but not yours this time. Another bride, another girl swallowed by silk. You sit up, robe heavy against your skin, and listen. There's something almost cruel about how frequently these processions occur in the city, as if the empire is constantly feeding itself, wives devouring futures in exchange for one more treaty, one more alliance, one more celebration. You wonder if that girl is afraid. You wonder if she can still feel her own name. The streets will cheer for her, just as they did for you. But the moment the veil comes down, her voice will be muffled too. You know that now. That's the secret no one told you. The wedding procession is not just an event, it's an execution, dressed as celebration. Your own procession comes back to you in fragments. The gold shoes, the pressure of the girdle, the strange heat beneath the veil. You remember the way people shouted blessings and threw petals that landed like little bruises on your skin. You didn't stumble, which means you were lucky, or at least not unlucky. One girl a decade ago fainted mid-procession and was quietly married off to a monastery instead of a man. Superstition has teeth here. Historians still debate whether these elaborate processions were more religious or theatrical. Some say they were remnants of pagan rites, hollowed out and redressed in Christian trappings. Others argue they were always meant to intimidate to remind the bride and the city that this union was not about two people. It was about power, about spectacle. You believe it was both, because you remember how it felt to walk between rows of guards holding polished shields like mirrors. You saw your reflection in one and didn't recognize yourself. A servant enters without knocking, her arms full of folded garments. You don't ask what they're for. You've learned not to. Instead, she lays them on the chaise and whispers that you're expected at the south courtyard by the 6th hour. You nod. She doesn't wait for acknowledgement, just bows and vanishes. You rise slowly. Your joints feel older than they should. There's no ceremony to the dressing today, no layered veils or perfumed oils. Just a robe with tight sleeves, a belt of silk cords, and a thin chain with a single icon that rests just above your collarbone. You've been given a new color scheme now, cool blues and pale grays, appropriate for a married woman. The old golds and reds were for brides, for things unspoiled. Your appearance must now reflect humility, steadiness, devotion. You look at yourself in the polished basin as a second maid adjusts your braid. You look quiet, intentional, like a statue carved from someone else's dream. As you make your way to the south courtyard, you pass windows that once framed the world outside like paintings. Now they feel like little traps. The streets bustle below, merchants shouting, horses clattering over stone, bells ringing from a church not far away. But you no longer move among them. You've been moved above them, into a place where footsteps must be soft and words must be softer. When you arrive at the courtyard, a handful of noblewomen are already gathered. Their voices buzz like bees low, constant, slightly irritated. They speak of the weather, of a mosaic being restored in the chapel, of a servant who dropped a silver tray and was sent to the kitchens as punishment. You join the circle. You're greeted with nods, but no warmth. These women have been here longer. They know the rules better. They are watching you for cracks. The courtyard is framed with arches, grapevines winding up the columns, jasmine spilling over the edges. It would be beautiful if it didn't feel so staged. You sit where you're told. A girl no older than 13 serves chilled water and tiny pomegranates on a silver dish. The woman beside you, Lady Euphemia, you think leans closer and murmurs, "Your procession was exquisite, very moving." Her smile doesn't reach her eyes. You thank her and wonder what she's really trying to say. In Byzantium, compliments are rarely sincere. They're signals or traps. You sip your water and listen as the conversation shifts to the bride currently being paraded through the city. One woman chuckles. She tripped stepping out of the sedan. An omen. Surely. Another replies. Or just bad breeding. I hear her mother was from Trebizond. They all laugh. You do too. Quietly. Because silence would stand out more. A eunuch appears with a scroll and begins reading a list of upcoming feast days and court appearances. You're expected to attend most of them. The Empress will be watching, not just your clothes or your posture, but your composure, how you interact, how you listen, whether you bow just slightly too deeply or not quite enough. It's not a test, it's a surveillance. Byzantine court life is built on performance. Every movement signals allegiance. Every silence hides a strategy. You begin to understand why some women withdraw, entirely retreat to private chapels, feign illness, bury themselves in embroidery. It's not laziness, it's survival. You return to your chambers after the meeting, mind buzzing, shoulders tight. A scroll has been left on your writing desk. It's from your mother. You recognize the hand. The ink is faint, the script uneven. She writes that your father is well, that the apricot trees have bloomed early this year, that she lit a candle for you on your wedding night, that she misses you. You read the letter 3 times. It's short, but in it, you feel the weight of everything that's been left unsaid. She doesn't ask if you're happy. That would be impolite. She doesn't ask if he's kind. That would be dangerous. She just hopes the apricots ripen sweet this year, as if that could carry a blessing. You fold the letter carefully and tuck it into your psalm book. Later, you will trace the ink with your finger until the paper goes soft. The afternoon slips by in a hush. You spend it alone, pacing the length of your chamber, counting the tiles in the mosaic floor. One is cracked. You stop and stare at it. There's a comfort in its flaw, a tiny rebellion, allowed to exist unnoticed. You imagine pressing your toe into that crack, widening it, letting something in, but you don't. Because your role is to maintain perfection, not to question it. You return to your window and watch the last of the wedding procession pass through the city gates. The drums are slower now, the trumpets quieter, the crowd has thinned. You wonder if the bride has begun to feel it yet, that emptiness that follows applause, that silence that comes after celebration, that moment where the curtain drops, and you realize you were never the audience. You were the show. Later that evening, as dusk rolls over the palace like a soft blue wave, you are summoned to prepare for your public appearance with the groom. It is the first formal presentation of you two as husband and wife, and everyone already knows what they're meant to see: a harmonious pair, a successful union, a calm affirmation that everything is proceeding as the empire intended. You don't feel like part of a couple. You feel like a symbol standing beside a man who also knows he's a symbol, which somehow makes it worse. There's no room for error in symbols. They must shine without flickering. You dress slowly, robe layered with gold trim, cuffs stiff, collar high. Your attendants fuss with your hair again, plaiting it into coils and threading tiny pearls through the braid. One of them says nothing but hums tunelessly while adjusting your girdle. You realize she's wrapped it tighter than usual, and you wonder if she's nervous on your behalf, or simply making sure your posture won't betray any slouch of emotion. By the time you step into the receiving hall, it is full of torches and strangers, music floating like perfume in the air, and the scent of saffron clinging to roasted almonds passed around on brass platters. He waits by the far end of the hall, robed in white, gold sash at his waist, hands clasped as though in prayer. You walk slowly toward him, counting each step not out of fear of falling, but to hold on to anything that belongs to you alone. Your steps, your breath, your silence. The moment you reach him, he offers his hand, and you take it. It's warm, a little sweaty. He leans in just slightly, enough that only you can hear him murmur. You look tired. You don't answer, because if you speak, the whole room will hear. Guests flood in, courtiers, senators, ambassadors from cities you've only ever seen painted on maps. They speak to your husband, but glance at you. They toast your union, but watch your expressions like hawks. You learn quickly that even your stillness has to perform something: grace, happiness, dignity. Not too much, though. Too much joy, and they'll think you're naive. Too little, and they'll whisper you were forced. A noblewoman's face is like a curtain pulled across a stage you let just enough emotion through to make the story believable, and keep the rest locked behind your eyes. Historians still argue whether Byzantine noblewomen held any real power in these performances. Some say they cultivated mystery as a shield. Others claim they became invisible. You suspect both are true, because tonight you are praised and ignored in the same breath. The Empress passes near you. She doesn't speak, but gives you a look steady, cool, almost maternal. It's not affection, it's assessment. You've seen that look before, on the faces of women choosing silk at the market, calculating fabric by weight, not beauty. She glances once at your hands, your rings, your posture, and then moves on. You exhale through your nose, quietly. A handmaiden behind you takes note of that and subtly adjusts your veil. Even your sighs are monitored. The food comes in waves, platters of mulled grapes, spiced lamb wrapped in grape leaves, little pastries shaped like birds. You taste almost nothing. You smile as required. You raise your cup when others do. A senator from Antioch tells a joke that everyone laughs at, and you find yourself laughing too, even though you didn't understand a word of it. A moment later, someone compliments your embroidery. You nod and say the piece was made by a nun in your household, not you. They nod, as if confirming a suspicion. They expected you to be humble. You gave them exactly what they wanted. It's like dancing without music, every step silent, every misstep unforgiving. Midway through the evening, a group of musicians plays a hymn dedicated to Saint Euphemia, and you're invited to stand beside your husband while he offers a brief invocation. His voice is clear, practiced. You've heard priests chant with less conviction. You glance at the gathered crowd and realize how little any of them care about sincerity. They're not here for faith. They're here to witness continuity. Every marriage reinforces the empire. Every bride is a stone placed into the mosaic of order. You're not the focal point. You're one tile. If you shine, they all glow a little brighter. If you crack, the whole image suffers. After the hymn ends, the room begins to shift toward relaxation. Wine flows more freely. Laughter comes easier. The older guests begin to retire, leaving the younger nobles to talk more candidly. Still, you remain near your husband. It would be inappropriate to wander. He begins speaking with a general whose armor clinks when he gestures. You remain silent but present, hands resting lightly on the back of a carved chair. A young woman with amber earrings approaches you and says, "You carry your curtain well." You blink. She clarifies your veil. It doesn't fall, even when the wind changes. Then she walks away before you can respond. It's not a compliment, it's a warning. Everyone is watching to see whether you'll falter. Eventually, you're allowed to leave. It isn't phrased as permission, but everyone knows. A discreet nod from the chamberlain. A slight shift in the music. You step away from your husband, offer him a bow of your head, and return through the long corridors to your wing. It feels even quieter than usual tonight. Maybe it's the music still playing faintly in your ears, or maybe it's the absence of applause. Your slippers scuff the tiles, but you don't correct your gait. Just this once, you let them hear you. You pass a corridor window and pause. The night is clear. The stars are bright. The city is too beautiful to be honest. You imagine the other bride, the one from earlier, now curled on a similar bed. Her hair still pinned tight, her thoughts loud in her skull. You wonder if she cried. You didn't. Not even when they dressed you like a relic, or when they counted your dowry aloud like an auction. But part of you wishes you had, just to prove you could. In your chamber, the maid waits with a bowl of warm rose water for your hands. You wash in silence. She brushes your hair without speaking. You sit at the edge of the bed again, where it all began. The gold shoes are still by the hearth. You haven't touched them since the wedding. They glint in the firelight like something alive. You resist the urge to kick them. You won't break. Not over shoes, but you understand now why some women disappear behind curtains and never come back out. It's not fear, it's self-preservation. You lie back, fully clothed, eyes wide, thoughts loud. Somewhere in the distance, the drums begin again. Another bride, another feast. Or maybe just the city reminding you that the empire never sleeps. You breathe in through your nose, count to 4, exhale. The candle beside your bed flickers. You imagine it's whispering your name, not your new title, not lady, just your name. The one you said to yourself as a child when no one else was listening. You cling to that, because tomorrow there will be another curtain, another smile, another veil to wear over your silence, and you will wear it well. The next day arrives without permission, the light pressing through the window screens like it's looking for something. You lie still, half buried in the folds of a quilt that smells faintly of lavender and lemon wax, and you think today, they will whisper, not to you, about you. They always do after the third day. The third day is when a bride becomes part of the furniture, and the novelty wears off. It's when the women in the halls stop bowing as low, when the servants' gossip shifts from admiration to analysis. The marriage is no longer new, it's content now, and content must be evaluated. You feel it already, the weight of glances behind fans, the echo of footsteps that hesitate outside your door before scurrying away. Someone is always watching, but no one says your name. That's the first thing they take in Byzantium, your name. It fades under the layers of titles, duties, and veils until it becomes a sound you almost flinch from. You sit up, touch your bare feet to the cold floor, and wonder how many women before you have tried to remember themselves this way by starting the day silently, hoping that silence will preserve something. Later, you attend a small gathering in the southern colonnade, a space reserved for the women of the court to exchange news, observe rank, and perform the sacred act of appearing useful. You're handed a basket of embroidery thread, and you begin to stitch. You don't know what it's meant to become a dove, maybe, or a palm frond. The pattern was pre-drawn by someone else. Your job is to fill it in without error. The metaphor is too obvious to enjoy. Around you, the voices rise and fall in tones so careful they might as well be music. No one speaks plainly. Even a comment on the weather can mask something venomous. It's unusually warm for spring. One woman says, perhaps the heavens are displeased. Another adds, or perhaps too many weddings have brought smoke where there should be fire. They both laugh, but the glances that follow flick in your direction and away like tiny knives. You smile softly and tie another knot in your thread. One of the older women, a duchess with too many rings and a voice like overcooked honey, sits beside you and begins to hum. She doesn't look at you directly, but after a moment she murmurs, they don't explain the real cost, do they? You don't ask who they are. You don't have to. She adjusts the sleeve of her robe and continues. They dress you like a relic, parade you through marble halls, and tell you you've been chosen, but what they mean is that you've been exchanged. You keep stitching. She watches your hands. Keep them busy, she says, almost too quietly. Idle fingers invite suspicion. Then she smiles, wide and lovely, and says loudly, your work is exquisite, my dear. You'll be a favorite at court. And just like that, she floats away, leaving you with a half-finished dove and the sensation that you've just been inducted into something dangerous and necessary. After the gathering, you walk the corridor lined with saintly icons and realize how easily the images begin to blur. There are so many Marys, so many martyrs. Their faces are soft, round, serene. You wonder if the artist ever painted real women or only ideals. The saints never frown, never question. They gaze upward or inward, always still. You pause before one Saint Theodora, gold halo flaking slightly at the edge, and you imagine peeling back the paint to find a woman beneath it, blinking against the candlelight, asking, was this truly sanctity? Or just silence made sacred historians still argue whether the veneration of female saints in Byzantium empowered noblewomen or just pacified them. Some say it gave women role models of strength and resilience. Others say it was a cautionary tale, be still, be holy, or be forgotten. You stare until your eyes blur. You pass a chapel where two women whisper behind the curtains. You can't see them, but their voices carry just enough for you to make out a name, yours. You pause without moving. She walks too slowly, one says, or maybe too carefully. It's hard to tell which is worse. The other replies, still, She hasn't caused offense, not yet. Then a pause, but she will. They always do. You continue walking. Your steps are measured, not slow, not fast, just enough to echo properly, to sound dignified. You've learned that even your pace can be interpreted. Walk too fast and you're impatient, too slow, and you're arrogant. One wrong step, and the entire court reinterprets your history to suit the new version of you they want to see. Back in your chambers, you find an anonymous gift placed on your writing desk. A single sprig of rue tied with a gold thread, a common herb, often planted in gardens, but also used in old spells protection, sorrow, and sometimes abortion. You hold it between your fingers and feel the meaning prickle up your arm. Who sent it? A warning, a blessing, a joke. You don't know, but you keep it. Because in a place where words are too dangerous, symbols survive. You tuck the sprig inside your psalm book beside your mother's letter. Between the ink and the petals, you feel something begin to gather, a quiet memory of self. The evening is spent beside your husband at another banquet. This one smaller, with fewer guests, mostly military men and scholars. He speaks little. You speak even less. They laugh about the new taxes in Bithynia, the rising grain prices, a poet arrested for comparing the emperor's beard to a goat's. You smile politely, though your lips ache from doing it so often. A scribe asks about your thoughts on architecture. It's a trap. They want to see if you'll speak out of turn. You say something vague about harmony and proportions. He nods approvingly. Disappointed you didn't stumble. After the meal, you return to your rooms alone. The sandals pinch less now. You've grown used to walking in them. The girdle bites your waist, but you barely notice. You sit at your vanity and let the maid unpin your hair. Each pearl placed into a bowl with a soft chime. Your scalp tingles with the weight being lifted. You ask her name. She hesitates, then says, Irene. You repeat it back. She looks startled. No one ever uses their names here. Names are dangerous. Names remind you that people are people. You say it again. Quietly, Irene. She nods. And for the first time, someone smiles without calculation. Later, you light a candle yourself, not out of piety, but to see your own shadow dance across the wall. You study it. The curve of your nose, the slope of your neck, the way the candle makes you flicker like a ghost. You whisper your name, not your title, not your role, not the one they gave you when you crossed that marble hall, but the name whispered to you by your mother, half sung to you by your nursemaid, etched into the underside of your memories. You say it once, then again, then you blow out the flame. The room is quiet, but the whisper lingers. The route they made you walk on your wedding day still lives in your feet. You can feel it sometimes when you're standing still too long, like the echo of stone beneath the silk, a rhythm your body hasn't yet unlearned. That winding, exposed path through the heart of the city wasn't chosen at random. You thought it was a celebration, a ritual. You thought the petals were blessings, the trumpets jubilant, but now, with distance and silence between you and that day, you begin to see it clearly. The route was a warning, not just to you, but to every girl who watched from a balcony or behind her mother's robe. This is what happens. It said, this is what you become. The streets they chose were deliberate. They passed through places of public memory, through old forums and basilicas, past mosaics of dead queens, past broken statues whose faces had been scratched off. You were being threaded through a tapestry of consequences. Every archway said, obey. Every echo on the pavement said, do not falter. The path was designed to be seen and to make sure you understood who was watching. Even the crowd, you now realize, was part of the architecture. They weren't there to cheer for joy. They were there to confirm your value. You saw women in the crowd with blank faces and clenched fists. You saw men whisper behind their hands. You even saw a child holding a carved doll shaped like a bride, its veil too long and dragging in the dust. Historians still discuss the theatricality of Byzantine processions. Some praise them as cultural masterpieces, living art designed to express unity and divine order. Others point to their cruelty, the way they paraded young girls as spectacles, displays of wealth disguised as sanctity. You suspect both are true, But neither explains how cold it felt when your veil clung to your lips and the sun burned through layers of symbolism stitched too tightly to remove. The procession was flanked by guards, of course, men in lacquered armor with curved swords and decorative sashes. Not because they feared violence. No one would dare disrupt a noble bride's path. No. The guards were there to make sure you didn't try to escape. You remember how they walked slightly behind and slightly ahead, like a cage that breathes. They were silent, but their presence was louder than the drums. One of them met your eyes once. You don't know why you looked up. Maybe it was the weight of the heat, or the dizziness from holding your breath too long. But you looked, and he blinked once. Slowly, not a warning, not kindness, just acknowledgement. That moment stayed with you longer than the wedding vows. The route passed through the Plaza of Justinian, where the statue of the old emperor once stood, holding a globe like it contained all fate. The statue's hand had fallen off a century ago, but no one repaired it. They just adjusted the story, said it was meant to represent divine surrender. You walked beneath that pedestal, your shadow brushing against broken stone, and you thought, even gods can be reinterpreted. Now you wonder what they'll say when your name is forgotten, when the silk rots, when the procession becomes just another line in a court record. Will they remember that you didn't stumble, that you didn't cry, or just that the jewels sparkled under the afternoon sun? You remember the moment when the crowd fell silent. Not entirely, there was still the rustle of robes, the occasional cough, but it felt like silence. And that feeling is what you carry. It happened when you reached the final turn, the narrow street between the Church of St. Mama's and the old orphanage. A tight, shadowed space where the sound of the drums changed, muffled and mournful. The sun couldn't reach there. You walked through shadow, and you knew this is the place they let you feel alone. This is the final warning. Not in words, in absence, no cheers, no pedals, just the hollow sound of your own footsteps. You felt the chill then, even in the summer heat, and it crept up your spine like a second veil. Inside the orphanage gates, children pressed against the iron bars, peering through with wide, sun-touched faces. You weren't supposed to see them, but you did. Girls, mostly, young, barefoot, silent. Some held dolls. One held a scrap of cloth tied like a veil. You wanted to wave. You didn't. You wanted to stop. You didn't. Instead, you stared ahead, spine straight, as you'd been taught, because behind you, the guards would have tightened formation, because beside you, noble women would have murmured, because around you, the entire city was watching to make sure you performed purity correctly. You weren't a person, you were a passage. The procession finally emerged into the larger courtyard before the palace gates, where the full crowd had gathered again. Trumpets blared, drums rose, the silence broke like glass, and suddenly you were back in the rhythm of spectacle. They opened the gates as if parting the heavens, and you stepped through, crossing into a place that didn't belong to the world anymore. That's how they described it. The inner palace is like the bosom of God, someone once told you, but it didn't feel divine. It felt enclosed, designed not to lift, but to contain. You stepped into its cool, echoing walls and realized you would rarely leave them again. And now, weeks later, you replay that route in your head, again and again. Not because you miss it, but because it won't leave you. The path is in your muscles, the turns in your breath. You wonder who designs these routes. Some anonymous steward, a bishop. A committee of protocol scholars flipping through books of precedents. Does anyone ever say, this turn is too sharp, or this corridor too dim, or this corner passes too close to a memory? You doubt it. In Byzantium, tradition is always right, even when it forgets why it started, even when it leaves you sleepwalking through a ritual older than your own family name. Sometimes you imagine what would happen if a bride simply stopped, mid-procession, refused to move, dropped her veil, sat down on the marble and said, no. Would the city stop too? Would the drums pause, the eunuchs blink, the guards hesitate, or would the machinery grind forward, dragging her along like a snag thread? You suspect it would keep going, because the empire has no patience for stillness, unless it's decorative, Stillness must be staged, sanctified, framed in gold, not lived. You sit at your window that night, tracing the old route with your finger in the air, murmuring the names of the streets you barely saw, the corners you turned without looking, the shadows that folded around you like cloaks. You wonder how many other women remember their roots. You wonder if, when they sleep, their bodies keep walking. If their dreams are always set in marble corridors. You wonder if you'll ever walk anywhere again without hearing the faint echo of ceremonial footsteps behind you. A breeze slips through the shutters, carrying with it the scent of the city's salt, smoke, iron, and figs. Somewhere below, the faint sound of drums again, maybe another bride, or maybe just the city reminding you that the path never really ends. It loops, like a procession that returns to the same spot again and again, but pretends it's going somewhere. You press your forehead against the cool stone, close your eyes, and whisper your name not to remember it, but to prove you still can. You begin to notice that the way men look at you has changed. Not just your husband, but all of them. Even the ones who barely speak. Even the ones who pretend they're too important to care. Before the wedding, their glances were appraising, curious, speculative, occasionally sympathetic. But now, their eyes skim over you with the quiet judgment reserved for statues and property. You're no longer a girl to be courted or a pawn to be positioned. You are a sealed vessel, not sacred, exactly just claimed. Their eyes check for signs of use, signs of fertility, signs that the investment has taken root. No one asks how you are. No one dares. But they watch the curve of your belly when you stand too quickly. They count your yawns. They scan your plate at banquets to see if you eat fish or soft cheese, as if that alone will reveal a secret not even you would know yet. The whispers follow you like perfume. Has she conceived too soon to tell? She doesn't look sick yet. Perhaps she's barren. You walk through the palace with your back straighter, not because you're proud, but because any slouch might be misread. In Byzantium, posture is prophecy. At one of the smaller liturgies in the imperial chapel, you kneel beneath a mosaic of the Virgin and Child. The ceiling is low, the incense thick, and the only sound is the soft flutter of robes against stone as noble women settle into their places. You are the youngest among them now, but not the most scrutinized. That honor belongs to the woman beside you, older, childless, third marriage, and visibly anxious. The priest's chant winds through the nave like smoke, and as he raises his hand in blessing, you notice how she clenches her fists, hidden beneath her cloak. You do not speak to her, but your breath syncs with hers. You both know that this silence isn't peace. It's pressure wrapped in gold leaf. Historians still argue whether women in Byzantium embraced the religious mystique imposed on them. Some say it gave them dignity, others say it erased them. But when you look up at the mosaic, the Virgin's eyes seem not to bless, but to warn. After the service, a nobleman, one of your husband's uncles, approaches with an exaggerated bow. He smells of sweat and cloves, and his voice carries too much cheer. You shine like a mother already, he says. You smile tightly. He doesn't notice, or doesn't care. My wife says the Empress had her first child within 3 moons of marriage. Blessed, that one. He winks, as if fertility were a game. You nod. Say something about the mercy of heaven, and excuse yourself before your skin begins to itch from standing so near him. You make your way back through the colonnade, each step a measured retreat, each breath a controlled exhale. You are learning how to vanish without moving, how to erase yourself while still being seen. The women in your household now speak of nothing but signs: a missed appetite, a change in skin, a dream of pomegranates. You listen, you nod, you play along. You've already learned that to deny interest is to invite suspicion. You must appear hopeful, but never desperate, confident, but never proud. You must say you trust in God, and in time, but you must also chew the bitter herbs slipped into your tea, just in case. No one tells you what's in the herbs. They don't have to. You drink slowly, lips burning slightly, and say a quiet prayer that's not really a prayer, but a wish. Let it be enough. The pressure intensifies as the weeks go on. Your husband grows quieter. Not colder, just quieter. He watches you across rooms like a man reading omens in smoke. He asks if you're tired more often than before. He asks if you've eaten. He never touches you in public, and only rarely in private now. You wonder if he's waiting to see a miracle before he believes in the marriage, or if he already regrets the match. You don't ask. You never ask. Questions are invitations, and you cannot afford more guests in your mind. The physician visits discreetly, an old man with a soft voice and a soft step. He checks your pulse, your tongue, your breath. He asks about dreams, about cycles, about headaches. You answer carefully, not because you want to lie, but because every word will be repeated elsewhere. You know how this works. He smiles, says you are healthy, recommends more rest, less fig wine, a bath with certain herbs. You nod. Later, your maid tells you that same physician treated the empress once for melancholy, that he believes the womb can hear the voice of God. You don't know what to do with that, so you do nothing. You go to bed early. You speak less. You read from the Psalms aloud even when no one listens, especially when no one listens. One afternoon, you overhear a conversation between two ladies in waiting. They think you're asleep behind the curtain, but your breath is too shallow to fool the room. One says, if she doesn't quicken by the feast of the Dormition, they'll start the paperwork. The other gasps, annulment. No, says the first, relocation, to her father's estate, quietly, with dignity. You don't move. You barely blink, because in this empire, even your womb has a deadline. That night, you dream of walking the wedding route again, but this time, you're barefoot. No veil, no shoes. The streets are empty. The doors closed. No one watches. You reach the palace gates and they don't open. You knock, but your hands pass through the wood like smoke. You wake with your pillow damp, your fingers clenched in the blanket-like claws. The candle has burned low. Dawn hasn't come yet. You sit up, swing your legs over the bed, and breathe in the night air. Your shadow on the floor is long and still. You think, what am I if not pregnant? What am I if not producing something? The answer doesn't come, only silence. The next morning, you bleed. It's not surprising. It's not new. But this time, it feels louder. The cloths are folded discreetly, the basin rinsed. Your maid says nothing, but her glance lingers. Later, your husband doesn't ask. He just nods when you say you're feeling tired and turns away before the candles are lit. You sit in your window chair long after the maids have left, hands resting in your lap like broken wings. Outside, the city hums, markets open, children shout, prayers rise from minarets and churches alike, and you, high above it all, wait for the next round of questions to begin. You take out your psalm book. The sprig of rue is dry now, its leaves curling at the edges. You place it beside your name, written in ink so faded you can barely read it, but it's still there. You trace each letter slowly, like an oath. You're still here. Your blood is still yours. Your breath still comes. Your name still answers. The city may watch. The palace may weigh. But for now, in this quiet hour between failure and expectation, you hold yourself like a secret. And you don't speak it aloud, because not every prayer needs to be heard. You learn quickly that in Byzantium, solitude isn't granted, it's earned, not by asking, but by enduring. Eventually, the court forgets to watch you as closely. You stop being the newest bride, another wedding passes, then another. You watch from behind carved screens as new girls are veiled and painted, walked and praised, smiled at and judged. You know the weight of the garlands they wear. You can feel it in your own spine. Now, when you walk through the colonnades, fewer eyes follow. The ones that do are older, quieter, more curious than critical. The tension never vanishes entirely, but it thins, loosens, breathes. The palace has decided for now that you are stable, not remarkable, not threatening, just reliable. And that, in this world, is a kind of protection. You've learned to be unremarkable the way some people learn to dance, not with joy, but with precision. You glide through conversations like someone translating a language she's never heard aloud. You smile in places you're supposed to smile. You pause in just the right places. You let them believe you're exactly what they want to see. Historians still argue whether this subtle compliance was a form of power or a symptom of erasure. But to you, it doesn't feel like either. It just feels like breathing with one lung possible, but exhausting. Your days fall into ritual, morning prayers, perfumed water, a bowl of pomegranate seeds, or boiled barley. Quiet walks through the cloistered gardens where no male footsteps are allowed. You begin to notice how much the world of noblewomen in Byzantium is made of half-heard sounds, the rustle of silk, the clink of rings, the hush of whispers that slip around corners like candle smoke. In the gardens, older women sit on benches beneath olive trees and speak without moving their lips. Their voices are low, often layered with irony. You learn that behind every compliment is a warning, behind every frown, a test. Your embroidery is so fine, one says, squinting at your latest work. Almost too fine. You must have no time for anything else. You smile. I only stitch what I'm allowed to think. She laughs, but her eyes linger. You passed, but only just. One afternoon, a young girl is brought to court. 12, maybe 13. Hair plaited so tightly you can see her scalp shine beneath the ribbons. She looks like a rabbit waiting to be caught. She's been promised to a distant cousin of the emperor. She's not smiling. You see her in the bathhouse once, flanked by 2 women in darker robes, being taught how to walk in a straight line without shifting her weight. Like you're floating, one tells her. Like you don't belong to the floor anymore. You remember those lessons, the ache in your arches, the nights you slept with binding cords around your shoulders to train your posture. You want to speak to the girl, to tell her that the pain will dull, that the veils stop feeling like suffocation, but you say nothing. She wouldn't believe you, or worse, she might. Your husband grows more distant, though not unkind. You exist in parallel now, like 2 stars sharing an orbit, but never touching. He leaves for diplomatic meetings, returns late, says little. You dine together only when protocol requires, and when you do, you know exactly how many bites to take, when to lift your goblet, how long to hold eye contact. You know not to interrupt him. You know when to laugh. Once, during a dull dinner, he leans in slightly and murmurs, "You've adapted well." It isn't affection, it's a footnote. You nod. "I've had excellent tutors." He smiles faintly and returns to his meal. The silence after that is somehow worse than before. You start keeping notes in the margins of your psalm book. Not prayers, not thoughts, just words. Single ones. Your name, the names of herbs, the names of rivers, sometimes lines of hymns, rewritten with their meanings reversed. The meek shall inherit the earth becomes. The unseen shall survive it. It's a quiet rebellion. No one sees. The ink is faint, the letters tiny. The act of writing reminds you that you still have a voice, even if it only lives between pages. One day you write, "I am not furniture." And then you laugh, quietly, because even that sentence feels too bold. The dowry procession comes back into your mind again. Not the gold, not the guards, but the feeling of being watched as if you were already a wife, already a mother, already gone. You remember how they looked at your silk-wrapped trunks and said things like, "What an impressive offering," never once addressing you directly, as if you were merely the ribbon around the real gift. You didn't cry then, you don't cry now, but sometimes, at night, you place your hand flat on your chest and try to remember what it felt like to be unscheduled, to wake and not know who you needed to please that day. One morning, you're summoned to the Empress's wing, unexpected, no context. That alone sends a chill up your spine. You dress with care, choosing a robe the color of ash rose, subtle but not forgettable. The maid weaves your hair into a tighter crown. You walk the long corridor with even steps, past marble lions, past servants who bow without meeting your eyes. When you enter the receiving chamber, the Empress is seated beneath a painted dome, light slanting across her like a verdict. She gestures for you to sit. You do. She doesn't speak immediately. Instead, she studies your face. Her own is unreadable, like a curtain drawn over fire. "Finally," she says, "the palace remembers women in 2 ways, as ghosts or as storms." You blink. Which do you prefer to be? You hesitate. Storms are remembered, you say. But ghosts remain. She nods once. Approval. You're not sure. She stands and walks to a nearby table, picks up a small box, and hands it to you. Inside a brooch shaped like a dove. Not a gift, a symbol. You understand instantly. You're being asked to speak less and smile more. To confirm, without being told, that you understand your place. You bow your head. Thank you, Your Majesty. When you leave, you carry the brooch like a command sealed in gold. Later, you pin it to your robe and stare at yourself in the mirror. The dove's wings are tucked in, carved delicately, frozen mid-fold, not in flight. You think they've given me a bird that cannot fly? You wear it anyway. At supper that evening, your husband compliments the brooch, a token he asks, a warning. You reply. He laughs softly, not sure if you're serious. You aren't sure either. That night, you return to the psalmbook and write only one word in the margin storm. And for the first time in weeks, you sleep without dreams. You've heard stories about the Magnara Hall since you were a child, but none of them quite capture how it feels to stand inside it. The space is too tall, too polished, too echoing to ever be warm. You step onto the mosaic floor that morning with your head bowed just enough to seem reverent. Though your eyes are wide, scanning the impossible scale of the chamber, the ceilings painted like the inside of a relic box, saints gazing downward with glassy detachment, and light pouring through high windows like judgment itself. You were told in whispers that once a bride enters the Magnara Hall, she leaves herself behind. The old name, the old family, the old language of safety, all dissolved under marble arches and ceremonial Latin. And now it's your turn to experience what that really means, not a ceremony, not a gesture, but a transformation. It is not painful. It is worse than that, it is polite. As you walk toward the dais with your husband beside you, you can feel the space folding you into its architecture. You become an element, a note in a long chant of continuity. You no longer have to wonder who you are. The Magnara Hall has already decided. The function today is public, ceremonial, and heavy with layers. It is not a wedding, nor a coronation. It is simply a recognition, a public display confirming your status as the wife of a man whose signature now binds treaties and whose smile seals alliances. It is, in theory, nothing more than a visual reassurance to the court, but it feels like a test. Your robe is heavier than usual, with the long trailing sleeves and embroidery that catches in your bracelets when you move. You've memorized every step 4 paces. Pause. Incline your head. Another 3. Pause again, but the floor is so polished you worry you'll slip. No one would help you. They wouldn't dare. Not because you are so important, but because they are. You understand now that Byzantium does not correct mistakes, it canonizes them. If you fall, the scribes will write about it for generations. She faltered before the archangel. They'll say, or, the dove brooch clinked once before the oath ill omen. You walk like your shadow is being measured. Your husband is calm. He always is in public. That's his strength detachment dressed in dignity. He does not hold your hand, but he walks beside you with the exact distance expected of a man confident in his choice. You know now that this is part of the theater. Affection is not required. Harmony is, and harmony is easier to fake than affection. You stop before the assembled notables, senators in robes so stiff they barely move, bishops with faces like dry parchment, court poets pretending not to judge your posture. One of the priests begins to chant, "Your name is mentioned, your new name." Not the one you whispered into the pillow last week. This one is longer, more imperial, more cumbersome. You don't recognize it yet, but you bow your head when it's spoken, as if you do. There's a moment in the middle of the ceremony when the hall falls silent. It's not long, perhaps a breath, but it stretches across your skin like a veil. You realize you're being watched not as a woman, but as a symbol, and symbols cannot speak for themselves. They are interpreted, dissected, held up to the light, and judged for how well they reflect what others need to see. You stand straighter. You think of the girl with the tight braids. You think of the dove brooch on your collar. You think of St. Euphemia's painted eyes, the way they never blink, even under centuries of candle soot. You realize, suddenly, that you have become your own myth. After the formalities, you are led to a smaller reception chamber. Fewer people now, just trusted court officials and family representatives. The air is thick with perfume and power. You are served a drink, rosewater and pomegranate, and asked no questions. Instead, people speak around you, about you, as if you are not yet fluent in their language. She carries herself well. One murmurs, unfortunate about the delay in heirs, but the empress was barren for 2 years before her first. Someone else adds, the way she inclined her head, very trained, very proper. One can tell she was raised well. You sit perfectly still and pretend you are made of stone. Your robe itches, your shoes pinch, your crown band tightens with every heartbeat, but your smile remains steady. That's all they require. A minor noblewoman, older, sharp-eyed, dressed in dark crimson, leans in to speak directly. You're adjusting quickly. That will serve you well. You nod. She adds, the court forgets the names of brides who smile too much, but it fears the ones who never do. Then she walks away, trailing scent and warning like smoke. You press your lips together, not in a smile, not in a frown, just closed, just unreadable, and you feel, for the first time, the faint pleasure of not giving them what they expect. Your husband reappears at your side as the reception winds down. He offers you his arm for the return to your chambers, and you take it because that is what is done. On the walk back, he says, almost casually, they seemed pleased. You nod. He says, you've been quiet lately. You reply, there's much to observe. He glances at you, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze, then looks away. You're becoming what they hoped. The words are meant as praise, but you wonder, what did he hope? That night, alone in your chamber, you remove the dove brooch and place it gently in the box where you keep the rue and your mother's letter. You look at yourself in the mirror, your hair uncoiling, your shoulders bare, your eyes rimmed with the faint purple of sleeplessness. You whisper the new name. You say it twice, then you say the old one, just once, like a spell that keeps the walls from closing in. You sit by the brazier and watch the coals glow. You think of the moment in the Magnara Hall when everything stopped for a breath. You realize that, despite everything, you were not afraid. Not because you felt safe, but because you understood the script. You understand that fear isn't useful once it becomes expected, and nothing is more expected in a Byzantine bride than quiet anxiety. You're done giving them what they expect. Before bed, you open your psalm book and write a single line in the margin beside Psalm 88. This is not silence. It is strategy. You don't light a candle tonight. You let the dark settle around you, soft as velvet. The court may see you as calm, as compliant, as proper, but you know better. You're not a statue. You are a shadow moving just beyond their reach, and in that darkness, you finally sleep. The first time you see his disappointment, it is not in his eyes, it is in the way he doesn't look at you at all. It's during a small gathering of nobles in one of the side courtyards, where acanthus vines curl around marble pillars, and musicians pluck delicate notes from lutes no one listens to. You arrive on time, veiled, composed, wearing the dove brooch and a silver belt that presses lightly against your stomach. He is already there, deep in conversation with a bishop and a naval commander, his face illuminated by lamplight and diplomacy. When you approach, he pauses mid-sentence out of politeness, not affection, and greets you with a gesture so restrained it might have been reserved for a distant cousin. You offer your practiced smile, incline your head the appropriate number of degrees, and sit. The space he gives you on the bench is precise, respectful, cold. You pretend not to notice, but you do. Because for all his dignity, all his poise, you've begun to learn the subtle language of what is withheld. Historians often write about the grandeur of Byzantine men, their wars and decrees and treaties inked in blood and oil. They rarely mention what they hold back from their wives, what averted eyes say, what silence means when spoken in front of others. You begin to sense the shift, not just from him, but from the court itself. The compliments dull, the glances become heavier, invitations arrive less frequently. At meals, the seating chart places you further from the empress. You start to hear your name used less, replaced with titles. Kyria, lady, wife of. You are still smiled at, still bowed to, but there's something brittle in it now, like a wine that has turned. You overhear one noblewoman remark that your complexion seems paler than usual, that your step lacks its former elegance. Another suggests that the veil you wore last feast day was too modest, perhaps too plain. These are not insults. They are inquiries disguised as concern. You understand the implication if you were with child. You would be glowing. And if you're not with child, what are you? Decorative, disposable, deficient. Your husband no longer visits your chamber. He sends small gestures, fruit, an extra prayer candle, a book of sermons copied in gold ink, but no words. The fruit spoils. The candle burns down, untouched. The book sits unopened. You know now that gestures are the last refuge of men who can't bear confrontation. One evening, he sends a robe embroidered with vines and roses, and you spend an hour staring at it, wondering whether the gift is meant to flatter or distract. You wear it once, to the vigil of St. Cassia. No one comments. That is comment enough. One day, you ask to visit the gardens alone. Your maid hesitates, but says nothing. You walk the long gravel path beneath the fig trees that have begun to bud, their waxy leaves trembling in the wind. You stop beside a pool where carp drift lazily in green water. You watch their mouths open and close, endlessly, as if mouthing questions no one can answer. A young servant passes with a tray of linen scraps and doesn't bow. You don't rebuke him. You don't speak at all, because now you've come to understand when a bride is no longer new. She must be useful, and usefulness, in the Byzantine court, means producing something, preferably a son, possibly a miracle, barring that, at least a story. You return to your room and write a line in the psalm book margin beside the verse about barren branches. Let them think I am still soil. You underline it. Later that night, your husband sends word that he'll be away for 2 weeks, visiting landholdings near Thessalonica. You're told not to accompany him. The messenger does not apologize. He only bows and leaves a folded note, unsigned. It reads, "Be well." You fold it neatly and place it beside the dove brooch, which you haven't worn in days. In the halls, conversations hush when you pass. Not obviously, never obviously, but just enough to make you feel your presence like a stain. You become a rumor in your own house. Women you once sat beside at banquets now nod from across the room and then turn away. One day, the girl with the tight braids, the young one, newly arrived, offers you a flower, a single violet from the garden. You take it, smile, and press it between the pages of your psalm book. Later, your maid warns you not to show too much affection. They'll say you're nostalgic. She whispers. They'll say you regret. You nod. But in truth, you do. Not because you want to return to innocence, but because you now see how short it lasted. You begin to spend more time in the chapel, not from devotion, but from necessity. There, in the cool, incense-thick air, you can sit for hours and not be asked for anything. Not a smile, not a child, not a response. You light candles for saints you don't believe in. You kneel before icons whose eyes don't blink. You memorize the pattern of the floor tiles and give names to each crack. The old nun who tends the chapel starts to notice you. She never speaks, but she leaves a small olive branch by your seat one morning. You don't know if it's pity or kinship. You leave a sprig of rue in return. For a moment, you almost laugh. You're exchanging coded offerings with a woman who hasn't spoken in years. It's the most honest relationship you have. One evening, at a feast for a visiting dignitary, you are seated at the far end of the hall, far from your husband, far from the empress. The lighting is dimmer here. The food arrives later. The musicians play, but the melody doesn't reach your corner. A servant forgets to refill your goblet. You let it remain empty. When the toasts are made, no one lifts their glass toward you. You realize, without surprise, that you have become a background figure, a detail in someone else's painting, still part of the frame, but no longer part of the meaning. That night, alone in your chamber, you take out your psalm book and turn to the back page. In a space you've kept blank until now, you begin to write not in code, not in fragments, but in full sentences. You write about the procession, about the dove brooch, about the quiet in the Magnora Hall and the cold glances at court. You write about your maid's warning, about the violet from the girl, about the way disappointment looks like averted eyes, and gifts sent without names. You write until your hand aches. Then you close the book and place it beneath your mattress. You blow out the candle, and in the dark, you say your name again. Not the one they gave you, not the one in the ceremony, the first one, the only one. And in that darkness, for the first time in weeks, you remember how to feel full, not of joy, not of pride, but of yourself. The problem with being watched is that you start to feel like you don't exist when no one's looking. The court may no longer follow your every movement with hushed fascination, but the space their attention once occupied has not left you. It hovers, it waits. You feel it in the way you hold your teacup, in the angle of your elbows as you sit by the window, in the tension behind your knees when you bow too long. One evening, while walking in the East Wing's outer garden, you catch your reflection in a bronze basin, slightly warped and tinted green from age. For a moment you think there's no one inside. The woman staring back at you has perfect posture, a calm mouth, eyes like wet marble, but nothing behind them. No flicker, no spark, and then it hits you. Your own image frightens you more than any punishment they could design. It isn't that you've become someone else. It's that you've slowly ceased to be anyone at all. And the most terrifying thing, no one noticed. Not even you. The expectation in the court is still unspoken, but heavier now. You must produce. They don't say the word child anymore. They refer to hope. They ask if there's news. They speak of blessings on the horizon. You're expected to nod, to smile faintly, to lay your hand lightly on your lower abdomen and let the imagination of the empire do the rest. You play along because not playing means being replaced. Not publicly. Byzantium is too polite for that, but structurally. You would be moved out of the inner wing, given fewer servants, less ceremonial responsibility, perhaps sent to a countryside estate to recover. Everyone would smile as it happened. Your husband would still sign his letters with your name beside his. The brooch would stay polished in your memory, but your face would fade from the palace like steam from morning glass. You've begun keeping track of the jokes made at banquets, not because they're funny, but because they're clues. Who laughs? Who doesn't? Who glances toward you when the story involves a clumsy bride or a silent wife? One evening, a general tells a tale of a noblewoman who miscarried and claimed it was due to an excess of piety. The laughter that follows is sharp. You don't laugh, neither does the empress, but you feel a gaze from across the table, a senator's wife, older, with wrists like twigs wrapped in silk. Her look is not unkind, but it's not soft, either. It says, "I see you." You hold her stare for half a second longer than etiquette allows, then drop your eyes to the salted olives on your plate. You eat 3 in a row, just to taste something bitter. A few days later, in the early gray before dawn, you wake from a dream where you were running barefoot through the Hagia Sophia, chased by nothing, watched by everyone. You were trying to reach the altar, but the floor kept growing longer, the icons melting down the walls, and the chandeliers swung like pendulums counting down to silence. You sit up in bed, sweating. The sheets twisted around your ankles like vines. You walk barefoot to the window, press your palm against the cool stone. The city is still. You are not. And you realize the stillness they've praised in you, the quiet dignity, the grace it was never yours. It was what they poured over you, like resin over wood, until it hardened. But beneath it, something still stirs. Later that morning, you're summoned to the embroidery chamber. A new tapestry is being prepared, an enormous depiction of the Virgin handing a scroll to Emperor Constantine. You are assigned a corner olive branches, to be stitched in muted greens and golds. You take your seat among the women, all bent over their frames like penitent scribes, and begin. The needle is comfortingly sharp. The thread behaves. For hours. No one speaks. You listen to the rhythm of fingers, thread, and breath. Then someone says your name. Softly. Curia. You glance up. It's a woman you don't recognize, maybe from Cappadocia, maybe from somewhere farther. She leans closer and says, "Did you know the Virgin in this scene was never meant to be smiling?" You blink. What? She nods toward the central design. In the old iconography, she's solemn, stoic. This smiling version is a later invention, a softer version for softer audiences. You look back at the tapestry, the smile is slight, almost imperceptible. But now that it's been named, it feels dishonest. You say nothing. You just go back to stitching, pulling the thread tighter than before. That night, you don't sleep. Instead, you sit at your small writing desk with a single candle and begin copying psalms. Not your margin notes, not your defiance, just the actual verses. You write slowly, as if trying to remember the taste of obedience. Your hand cramps, you shift your fingers, you start again. On the third line, your ink spills slightly, a blot blooming like a bruise across the word deliver. You stare at it. Then, quietly, deliberately, you write beside it in the same hand, I am not the bride you made. I am the shadow that remembers. You blow out the candle before the ink dries. Let it smear. Let it stay unfinished. In the weeks that follow, you speak less, but you see more. You watch the way the eunuchs whisper to each other, how they guard the scrolls like they're holding secrets. You notice which windows open from the kitchens and which ones don't. You begin to memorize which footsteps belong to which servant. You learn that the night guards always change shifts 3 minutes late, and that the woman who brings your tea sometimes leaves one cup hotter than the others. It's not paranoia, it's precision. You are not unraveling, you are observing. You are building a vocabulary of escape, though you don't yet know if you'll ever use it. One afternoon, you sit beside your husband in the Imperial Library as he reads a letter from Antioch. You're there as decoration, not participant. But he pauses, rubs his temple, and sighs. You say, gently, too many words. He doesn't look at you. Too many expectations. You both sit in silence for a while. Then, without turning his head, he asks, did you ever expect this life? You could say no. You could say yes. You could say it was chosen for you. Instead, you say, I expected to be seen. He closes the letter, folds it, leaves the room. Later, your maid finds you humming. It's a tune you don't recognize. She asks where you learned it. You say, I didn't. It's just mine. She tilts her head. It's sad. You shrug. So is the silence. That night, you open the psalm book again. Press the dried violet between your fingers, and write, they wanted a queen of stillness. I became a queen of echoes. You lie in bed, eyes open, listening to the night wind wrap itself around the palace like silk. Somewhere, someone is whispering. Somewhere, a woman is being dressed for a wedding. Somewhere, a name is being forgotten, but not yours. Not yet. You repeat it once more. Just once. Just enough. And the silence, for the first time in weeks, listens back. The marriage contract still rests in the archives, copied in thick ink and folded between parchments bearing the names of dead provinces and broken alliances. You saw it once, briefly, during one of those ceremonial moments when the patriarch nodded and a steward read its contents aloud in a tone so dry it sounded more like penance than promise. At the time, you barely heard the words. You were too focused on the way your veil stuck to your lip, on the heat radiating from the torches, on your knees aching against cold marble. But now, months later, you remember every clause, or at least what they meant: dowry obligations, inheritance terms, the requirement of conjugal harmony, and suitable effort to preserve lineage. You think about those phrases sometimes when lying awake at night, curled against the far side of your bed, your body a quiet question that no one dares to answer, because beneath all the incense and icons and hymns, your marriage is not a covenant. It's a contract. And a contract comes with conditions, one of which, you now understand, is silence, not the peaceful kind, the binding kind. You've begun hearing the phrase silent traps whispered by women who speak only when they're certain the corridor is empty. You hear it from lips pressed so closely together that the words emerge like breath. The contract is the silent trap. They say, you think it's a form of protection, but it's the bars themselves. You think of your own, not just the document, but the ritual, the walk, the oath. every element constructed not to elevate you, but to contain you. Historians argue whether Byzantine women ever contested their marriage contracts. Some cite rare petitions filed by widows. Others point to desperate letters sent from rural convents, signed with smudge wax and fading ink. But even then, those acts came after the damage, after the unraveling, after the silence had already folded the woman in so tightly that escape felt indistinguishable from erasure. You try to remember the exact moment you realized you couldn't leave. Not just the palace you always knew that wasn't possible, but the arrangement itself, the role, the blueprint pressed onto you with lace and doctrine. Was it when your name changed, when your body became a subject of court speculation, or was it simpler, quieter? Maybe it was the morning he said nothing after your third cycle arrived, without pregnancy, just adjusted the laces on his robes and left for the council chamber without looking back, or the night he touched your shoulder without warmth, as if you were furniture to be passed by rather than held. There was no violence, no outburst, just the kind of absence that hollows slowly, like a leak beneath marble, unnoticed until the floor gives way. You once thought a contract could be a kind of power, that if something was written down, it could be named. Named things could be known, and known things could be shaped. You no longer believe that. Now you see how written things can become prisons, how clauses tighten like ropes when repeated aloud in chambers full of men who never once bled for a future they were expected to create. You think about the ring you wear, a beautiful thing, gold coiled with enamel, made by a craftsman whose name you'll never know. Everyone praises its delicacy, its weightlessness. No one mentions how difficult it is to take off. No one asks why you've stopped trying. There's a rumor floating through the women's quarters now, soft as gauze, sharp as glass, that a young wife from a minor noble family tried to break her marriage agreement, that she refused her husband after a year of silence, citing cruelty not in blows, but in neglect, that she requested her dowry be returned, that she'd live out her life at her mother's convent instead. No one knows her name, or maybe they do, but won't say it. You hear snippets during shared meals, while walking the colonnades, during long silences in the embroidery room. She asked to leave. They say she wept in front of the steward. Her father sent word he does not recognize the complaint, and always. Inevitably, she should have waited, as if endurance is the only true virtue. You wonder what would happen if you did the same. Not the weeping, the asking. Would they laugh? Would they sigh and send you away with your dignity folded like old linen? Or would they summon a scribe to list your failings, tally them beside the clauses you supposedly broke, your empty womb, your quiet defiance, your refusal to disappear politely? Would they let you leave, or simply move you to another wing, deeper in shadow, where quiet women fade without scandal? You don't know. You suspect no one does, because no one ever writes down what happens to the ones who ask. One evening, you find yourself alone in the archive wing, an accident, or perhaps a gift. You walk slowly, trailing your fingers along the stone walls, pausing before niches that hold records of marriages far older than yours. You see names carved into cracked bindings, some in gold leaf, others in charcoal, empresses, sisters of governors, daughters of generals. You open a scroll at random. It details the union between a woman named Helena and a man 20 years her senior. Her father promised 5 estates and 2 slaves. The parchment lists these plainly, along with the notation, all conditions met. No mention of her voice, no mention of her fate. You roll it up carefully and place it back in its place. The steward finds you minutes later and startles when he sees you. "Kyria," he says, bowing too quickly. "No one knew you were." You interrupt with a smile. "I was looking for stories." He bows again, offers to escort you back. You don't refuse, but as you leave, your hand lingers once more on the wall, as if trying to read the past through touch. Back in your chambers, you light a candle and begin to copy one of the clauses from memory, not because you need it, but because you want to see the words laid bare. You write, "The wife shall uphold the peace of the house and safeguard the honor of the lineage through obedience, silence, and fruitful living." You underline fruitful. You write beneath it, "Does sorrow grow roots? Does endurance bloom?" You begin to fill the page with questions instead of answers, not just the kind that demand response, but the kind that confess themselves. If the contract was binding, why do I still feel untethered? If the marriage was sacred, why did no one ask me to speak? If this silence is virtue, why does it taste like ash? You pause when your candle begins to sputter, the wax pools, the wick sinks, the light dims. You tear the page from the book not roughly, but with care, and fold it into a small square. You do not hide it. You place it atop the chest of carved cedar, beside the brooch, beside the letter from your mother, beside the sprig of rue now pale and translucent. You want it visible. You want it to remain. You want there to be a record, even if no one else will ever read it. That night, when the maid comes to braid your hair for sleep, you ask her, "If I disappeared tomorrow, what would you remember?" She falters, then says, "That you didn't shout, that you didn't bow too low." You smile, not because it's flattering, but because it's true. You are not a loud woman. You are a precise one, and if they ever do erase you, they'll have to do it slowly, clause by clause. You whisper your name once more before sleep, not because you've forgotten it, but because you want the walls to remember. The night they lit the chamber with 7 oil lamps instead of the usual 5, you knew something was expected of you. You didn't ask. You never ask anymore. Asking implies you still believe answers are safe. Instead, you sat on the cushioned bench by the window while your maid brushed your hair. Each stroke a soft accusation, each tug a reminder that silence is not the same as peace. The extra lamps made the air heavy, too much light, too many shadows flickering against the tapestries, as if the room couldn't decide which version of you it wanted to display. You caught your reflection in the polished bronze pitcher, your face framed in gold, your eyes hollowed by ceremonial serenity. You could almost laugh. If this were a stage play, you'd be the queen sitting quietly in Act 1, the one whose lines were cut to make room for the chorus of consequences. But this isn't a play. This is your wedding night again, or at least, what they've decided it should be. The night the contract is renewed, not with ink or vows, but with breath and flesh and expectation. You are to lie still and carry possibility, whether you are ready, willing, or understanding that never enters the room. He arrived quietly, as always, no perfume, no flourish, just the soft shuffle of slippers and the weight of duty. He didn't sit, he didn't speak, he only stood there for a moment, watching you like someone watches a relic they're not sure they believe in anymore. You kept your eyes down, not from fear, but because it was easier to stay hollow that way. When he stepped closer, you breathed evenly. You reminded yourself you were trained for this. You reminded yourself that your body belonged to history now, not to feeling. Historians write about consummation in cold language, union confirmed, line secured, dynastic obligation fulfilled. What they don't write is the way the candlelight feels like judgment, the way your own breath starts to sound louder than his, the way every small gesture becomes choreography. He did not hurt you. That would be easier to understand. Instead, it was clinical, careful, like a ritual he no longer believed in, but still knew how to perform. No whispers, no tenderness, just the act, completed. And afterward, the silence grew longer than the night itself. He dressed without haste, glanced once in your direction, and said nothing. Then he left, as if the room had only borrowed him, as if you were still just a vessel, not a person. You didn't cry, you didn't pray. You lay back and watched the ceiling, where golden stars had been painted long ago, chipped now at the corners. You counted 27 stars before sleep took you like a weight. The next morning, the maids cleaned the room without comment. They changed the linens with gloved hands. One of them took the candle stubs and scraped the wax from the floor. You sat on the stool by the window again, holding a glass of watered wine, letting the taste linger. No one asked how you slept. No one ever asks. But later that day, the physician was sent. Routine. They said, just a check, just a visit. He asked the same questions as always. Appetite, pulse, bleeding. You answered with the same precision. Yes. Steady. No. He nodded. Prescribed mint tea and rest, as if mint could soften what was unspoken. In the weeks that followed, nothing changed. Not outwardly. Your duties remained public appearances, embroidery sessions, quiet meals served too hot. But within, you began to feel something unfamiliar, not despair, not fear, but weightlessness, as if your soul had quietly excused itself and left your body to keep fulfilling appointments. You started forgetting names. You stopped noticing the flavors of food. The bells that marked the hours became meaningless. Days folded into each other like linens in a dowry chest, clean, soft, interchangeable. You began writing shorter sentences in your psalm book, sometimes just single words. Empty. Breath. Paper. Wait. You didn't write your name. Not because you forgot it, because it no longer answered back. One afternoon, the Empress summoned you. Her letter was brief. Walk with me. You obeyed. You always obey. You met her in the North Garden, where citrus trees bloom even in winter. She didn't greet you. She simply began walking, and you followed. Her robes whispered along the gravel. After a while, she said, I remember my second year here. I thought I was doing everything right, and yet they watched me as if I were breaking something just by breathing. You didn't respond. That was expected. She stopped beside a fountain shaped like a lion drinking from a cracked bowl. They say stillness is a virtue, she continued. But really, it's a test. They want to see if you can rot without making a sound. Then she turned to you. Have you learned that yet? You looked her in the eye for the first time. Yes, you said. She nodded. Then you're halfway there. And with that, she walked away, leaving you in the shadow of the lion. That night, you dreamed of being lowered into a bath filled with ink, not water, ink, thick, black, silent. You were clothed, and as the ink rose, it soaked through your gown and veil, your bracelets and girdle, until every thread was stained. But your skin remained untouched, pale, untouched, unwritten. You woke up gasping, fingertips smeared with sweat, your mouth dry as ash. The candle beside your bed had gone out, and you didn't light another. You sat in the dark and whispered one word hollow, not as a complaint, as a fact. 2 days later, a messenger brought news from your husband. He had gone to oversee repairs in a distant monastery. No word on his return, no message for you, just his seal. You stared at the wax long after the servant had left. You didn't break it. You didn't care what was inside. Instead, you placed it in your cedar box next to the rest of brooch, letter, rue, folded page, crumbling violet. You realized your box had become a reliquary, not for saints, for fragments of the self. In the mirror, your face looks unchanged, but your eyes are learning how to disappear, not in defeat, in preservation. You've started to measure time not by candles or bells, but by breath. 10 slow inhales between visits, 20 between meals, 100 before someone speaks to you. You're learning how to hold silence like a blade, not to cut, but to protect. And still, they ask if there's any news. Still, you smile. They begin to call you Kyria more often now, never by name. The word carries weight, but not warmth. It is a title, polished and hollow like the brass censers swinging through the chapel aisles. It means lady, but it feels more like empty. When servants murmur it behind your back, it sounds like a sigh. When courtiers address you directly, it lands like a verdict. You used to wonder whether they had forgotten your name. Now you wonder whether they ever truly heard it. In Byzantium, to be named is to be known, but to be titled is to be filed away, indexed, wrapped, sealed. Even your maid hesitates now before speaking, not because she fears you, but because she's watching the shift. You are no longer newlywed, no longer expectant, no longer anything that demands attention. You have entered that phase of noble womanhood where silence is not just the background. It is the foreground, the music, the atmosphere. It is the only language spoken in your presence. You sit more often beneath the icon of Saint Anna now. She was the mother of the Virgin, often painted with a half smile, mid-instruction, holding a scroll she never reads aloud. You like her better than the younger saints, the ones who smile too sweetly or hold lilies like secrets. Saint Anna looks tired. She looks like someone who has carried expectation too long and now holds only memory. You stare up at her in the mornings, lips moving but producing no sound. The priest walks past you during matins and offers a slight nod. That's all you get these days. Slight nods, faint acknowledgments, gentle dismissals. There is a version of you that exists in everyone's mind, but it is no longer one you control. She's graceful, reserved, dignified. You almost envy her. She gets to exist without pain. Your days collapse into a kind of symmetry. You wake, bathe, dress, sit, eat, read, stitch, walk, kneel, and sleep. Nothing is painful, but nothing is alive either. The food tastes the same. The fabrics feel the same. Even the garden, once your solace, has dulled. The citrus trees no longer dazzle. The fountains no longer speak. You notice new cracks in the columns, new chips in the mosaic tiles. You begin to map them with your fingers, each one a small defiance, something changing, something breaking. You wonder if anyone else sees them, or if they all pretend the palace never ages. Byzantium worships permanence, but you know now that permanence is just the illusion cast by repetition. Your husband has not returned. It has been 40 days. The court says nothing. You ask nothing. Once a steward brought news of a shipment delayed due to weather. You nodded. He bowed. And that was the end of it. You've stopped wondering whether the absence is intentional or circumstantial. It no longer matters. You've become skilled at absence. You know how to fill a room with stillness so convincingly that even the walls stop echoing. If he walked in tomorrow, you're not sure you'd know what to say. You're not sure he'd know what to hear. There is a banquet for St. Demetrios, and you're expected to attend. You wear a gown the color of dried rose petals, the dove brooch pinned at the shoulder again, though it feels more like a brand than an ornament now. Your hair is coiled tight, your veil lighter than before. You move through the hall like a painting being carried careful, smooth, protected. The feast is loud, drunken, perfumed. Everyone is watching each other, but no one is looking at you. And in that, there is strange freedom. You begin to see what others cannot. The man whose goblet shakes just slightly from illness. The woman who scratches her wrist beneath her sleeves. The young servant who mouths every prayer but looks at no one. You begin to hear the deeper silence beneath the noise, the private dissonance behind the harmony. And you wonder how many others are pretending. Just like you. A woman you don't recognize sits beside you halfway through the meal. She's older, with pale eyes and a mouth that never seems to close completely. She smells faintly of cloves and decay. She leans in without ceremony and says, "You haven't spoken in 3 courses." You smile politely. "I've found silence tastes better." She smirks. It's also harder to misquote. You say nothing. She adds, "Do you know why they keep inviting you?" You look at her. She continues, "Because your silence is beautiful, and beauty, especially when mute, is the easiest thing to worship." She stands before you can respond, glides back into the crowd like a whisper that refuses to end. That night, you write in the psalm book again, but not in the margins. You begin at the back, carefully, 1 word per line. Seen, blessed, named, used, quiet, studied, displayed, praised, faded. You stop at 10, tear the page out, burn it in the candle flame. The ash smells like ink and fabric. You press your palm against the warm bronze of the censer and let it sear, just a little, enough to feel. In the weeks that follow, you begin to test the limits. Small things. You wear a gown with sleeves slightly too short. You arrive to Vespers 2 minutes late. You speak 1 full sentence to a guard when asked about the weather. He looks stunned, as if your voice broke something. The Empress glances at you at the next feast. Not long, just once, just enough. You nod, and then say nothing, because your silence is no longer submission. It is strategy. Your maid finds a thorn beneath your pillow. You say it came from the garden. You don't explain why it's wrapped in silk. You don't explain why you sleep better with it nearby. She doesn't ask. One night, she brings you a ribbon the color of wine and braids it into your hair without instruction. Another offering, another language. You don't thank her. You just place a slice of fig on her tray the next day. Byzantium has always loved codes. You're learning how to invent your own. The women begin to ask you for small favors. Can you speak to the steward? Can you recommend a seamstress? Can you pass on a request for a quieter chamber? They call you Kyria, still, but with less distance. You respond with brief notes, folded precisely, no signatures, only initials. You realize that silence has made you not invisible, but safe, and safety is currency. You wonder how long it will last. One morning, a dove appears on your windowsill, real, not carved, pale gray, blinking slowly. You offer it a grain of bread. It doesn't move. You speak to it softly. We match. It tilts its head. You extend your hand. It flies away. You don't chase it. You never do. You sit on the sill and write on your wrist with ink from the prayer book. Not every bird returns. You let it fade with sweat and time. That night, you dream of a procession, but this time, you're not walking. You are watching. The bride is veiled. She stumbles. No one catches her. You reach out from the crowd. She looks up. She has your face, but her eyes are open, and she does not bow. They begin asking for you at smaller councils now, not for decisions, but for presence. It starts with a polite request from the steward to attend a meeting about grain stores and taxation in a southern province you've never seen. You arrive dressed in a deep plum robe, simple gold pins holding your hair, the dove brooch left behind deliberately. The room stills slightly when you enter. You don't speak. You're not expected to. You sit beside your husband, who acknowledges you with a glance that carries neither warmth nor tension, just recognition, as one might offer a chair or a familiar inscription in a book. The men around the table nod respectfully. One of them, a portly advisor with too many rings, offers you dates from a silver bowl. You decline with a slight smile. The meeting proceeds. They speak in loops, repeating the same phrases: shortage, tribute, delay, tribute again, until the words blur. You watch. You listen. You count the number of times that each man repeats himself, how often someone says, as previously discussed. When it ends, no one asks your opinion, but two of them bow more deeply than required. Later, you hear someone refer to you as an anchor in the room. You're not sure if it's praise or insult, perhaps both. That evening, you return to your chambers and find a folded note beneath your prayer cushion. No name, just a single line, written in an unfamiliar hand. You're becoming the silence they fear. You read it 3 times before burning it over the brazier. You don't keep every artifact anymore. Some things are better reduced to smoke, but the words remain. They follow you through the next day like a veil. You notice how servants clear space a little faster when you enter, how the younger maids bow with lowered eyes, not out of fear, but a kind of reverence. You've become a presence that cannot be ignored, even if no one speaks your name aloud. Not power, exactly. Not rebellion, just wait. In the women's quarters, the conversations shift when you enter. They still gossip. Of course they always will. But there is now a rhythm to the silence that follows your arrival. Not cold, just cautious. You sit near the window and stitch olive branches into a velvet panel while the others speak in code. The lady from Myra's girl didn't return from her morning walk. They say a physician has been summoned for the Empress, but no one's ill. There are letters being burned at night. You say nothing. You don't need to. Silence, used well, is a blade with a hidden edge. You've stopped trying to prove anything. Now you let them wonder. At Vespers, the priest hesitates when he sees you. Just briefly. Just enough. He adjusts the incense, fumbles with the censer. You bow at the right time. Kneel when expected. But you feel his eyes linger as he chants. It's not suspicion. It's uncertainty. You've become the question no one wants to phrase. That's what happens in a palace like this. When a woman doesn't break, doesn't scream, doesn't fade, she becomes a variable. And variables are dangerous. You write more now. In secret. Not in the psalm book. But on scraps of parchment you fold into your sleeves or slip behind bricks in the chapel wall. You write things that are not facts. You write, if obedience is safety, then danger must be memory. You write, they ask for heirs, but offer no sanctuary. You write, there is no virtue in being consumed quietly. You don't write your name. You no longer need to. The words are yours, regardless. One afternoon, the Empress sends for you again. No reason given. You meet her in a cloistered garden at the edge of the women's wing, where jasmine climbs the walls and the sunlight filters in like mercy. She is already seated, her hands resting on her lap, her crown simple today pearls, not rubies. She does not rise. You bow, sit. She studies you for a long moment, then says, "There's a strength in you they didn't plan for." You say nothing. She leans slightly forward. The palace prefers its women lovely, fertile, and unthinking. You are none of these now. And yet, here you remain. Still, you say nothing. Her lips curl faintly. Be careful not to inspire too much. Then she offers a plum from her plate. You take it, not because you're hungry, but because it's part of the code. Afterwards, your maid finds a small scroll tucked between your garments. Another anonymous note. Even stone cracks under worship. You smile when you read it, not because it comforts you, but because it's true. You think of the mosaics in the chapel, those delicate lines of gold leaf and ceramic pressed into place centuries ago. They shimmer from a distance, but up close, you can see the fractures, the missing pieces, the places where time peeled back beauty to reveal dust. You walk past those mosaics every day, and no one else seems to see the damage. You do, and you begin to wonder what cracks you've left behind already. Who is noticing? At a dinner later that week, a minor courtier addresses you directly. It's the first time in months. He says, "The Kyria walks like someone who knows more than she's told." The table falls silent. You lift your goblet, sip, and say, "Only the quiet ever hear everything." He laughs, nervously. The Empress smiles. Your husband, seated at the far end, does not look up, but you see his knuckles tighten around his wine. For a moment, you feel your own presence pulsing beneath your skin like light. Not power in the usual sense, but the kind that makes others blink. You begin to wear darker colors, not mourning, just depth, plum, charcoal, deep blue. You keep the dove brooch in your cedar box now. Its symbolism no longer fits. In its place, you begin to pin a thin strip of black ribbon to your bodice. No one asks why, but one day, a younger noblewoman copies you, then another. By the end of the month, 5 women wear black ribbon instead of gold. It spreads like rumor, like shadow, like a song hummed beneath breath. You stop attending every feast. You claim headaches, fasts, prayers. No one forces you. They've grown used to your absences. You appear only when necessary. And when you do, you speak only once per gathering. Just once. Just enough. You've learned that the right silence can bend a room more than any speech. In the solitude of your chamber, you remove all mirrors. You no longer need them. You know who you are by how others move around you, what they do not say, what they fear to ask. Your reflection was never accurate anyway. Mirrors lie, but shadows, when traced, tell the truth. You spend your nights at the window, watching the city flicker in the distance. You name the lights after memories. That one. Your first feast. That one. Your mother's letter. That far, dim one near the docks. The part of you that still hopes. You sit with your hands folded and your mouth closed, not in obedience, in awareness. One night, you whisper not your name, but a word you haven't said in years, freedom. You let it sit on your tongue. You do not spit it out. You do not chase it. You only hold it, like a match that has not yet been struck. The wind lifts your veil slightly, and you do not pull it back down. It begins with a rustle paper against stone, silk against doorframe, the soft scrape of something being moved without permission. You sit still as it happens, the sound unfolding like a ritual, not the hurried bustle of servants, not the echo of a sandal in the corridor, but the deliberate quiet of someone leaving a message meant to be found. When the noise fades, you wait 5 breaths before rising. You find the scroll tucked behind the incense stand near your bed. The parchment is finer than the others, thinner, silkier, meant for scripture or royal decrees. But there's no emblem, no seal. Only one line written in deep blue ink. The procession ends when you stop walking. You read it twice, then again. The wording catches in you like a fishhook. You don't know who sent it. You no longer care. Someone else, somewhere within these golden walls, understands. And that's enough. You return to the chapel that night, not during prayer, after, when the candles have melted low and the scent of myrrh hangs like memory in the air. You sit before the icon of Saint Anna again, but you don't look at her. This time, your eyes settle on the Virgin behind her, arms raised in that impossible gesture of both surrender and strength. You stare into the painted eyes that never blink, the hands that never tremble, and for the first time, you let yourself think the heresy you've avoided since your wedding night. What if holiness isn't silence at all? What if divinity speaks only when we stop reciting? The next morning, the Empress calls for you again. No message, just a glance through a servant's eyes. You come without resistance. You wear no jewelry, no ribbon. You leave your hair loose. A silent challenge that only you understand. She's waiting in her solar, seated on a cushioned bench near a stained glass window that filters the morning into colored webs across her robe. She gestures for you to sit. You do. She doesn't speak at first. Then there are whispers now. Not just about you, but because of you. You say nothing. She continues. Some think you are becoming dangerous. Others, necessary. A pause. You must decide which one you wish to be. You nod once, and then, quietly, you answer. That decision was made the moment they veiled me and told me to smile. Her lips twitch. Not quite approval. Not quite fear, just recognition. Then be careful how you walk. The floor here remembers every footstep. The next procession arrives with little warning. A visiting dignitary from Trebizond has offered his cousin in marriage to one of the emperor's nephews. Another bride, another silent girl, another set of rituals meant to dazzle and devour. You are asked to assist, not to lead, just to guide. They tell you your presence will reassure the new girl, that you've become a symbol of stability. You almost laugh. You do not. You meet her in a narrow chamber overlooking the sea. She is younger than you were, smaller. Her hands flutter like moths. Her veil slips constantly. She has not stopped crying. You kneel beside her, adjusting the pins in her sleeves, smoothing the creases in her train. She whispers, "I don't want to go." You do not offer comfort. Instead, you take her hands in yours and say, "Then don't follow. Make them chase you." She doesn't understand. Not yet. But later, perhaps, years later, she might. When the procession begins, you walk behind her, not beside, not ahead, just behind. Close enough to catch her if she stumbles. Far enough that no one questions your silence. The streets are filled with petals again. The drums are softer now. Or maybe you just don't hear them the way you once did. Faces blur in the crowd. The sun hits the gold trim on her gown. You watch as she flinches at the trumpets. You remember that sound. You remember every step. And for the first time, you do not envy the bride. You mourn her. Later that night, after the feasting and the toasts, after the endless smiling and the slow dissolving of ceremony into appetite, you return to your chamber. The garden below is dark. Only one lantern flickers. You remove your veil, your robe, your shoes. You stand barefoot at the window, looking toward the sea. It is too dark to see ships, but you imagine them anchored, rocking, silent. You wonder if any of them are waiting for someone who will never come. Then something shifts. You notice a parchment pinned to your windowsill. No seal, just weight. A small pebble tied to the edge, as if to keep it from flying away. You unfold it slowly. There is no message, just a drawing. A woman standing with her back turned to a crowd, veil in her hand, eyes open. You run your fingers over the ink. It is not beautiful, but it is real. That night, you do not sleep. Not because of fear, because of clarity. Because you realize that the fear you once carried like a cloak has now become something else. Not courage exactly, but conviction. You are no longer part of the procession. You are the observer, the archivist, the interruption. The next morning, you ask your maid to bring your older gown, the one from your first wedding feast. long since hidden away. She hesitates, but obeys. The fabric no longer fits the same. The sleeves are tight, the neckline odd. You wear it anyway. You walk through the halls slowly, watching as heads turn, some in recognition, some in confusion, a few in concern. You return to the chapel and sit in the front pew. You stay there until sunset. The priest never interrupts. And as the light dies, you whisper a prayer not to be good, or loved, or remembered, but to be unwritten. Because only those unwritten still have time left to shape their endings. And in the silence that follows, you hear something unexpected. Applause, no. A footstep. Yours, walking away from the place where all the paths were chosen for you, and into one you've carved yourself. Now, let's take a breath together. The candles in the palace have long since burned down to waxy puddles. The sound of sandals and whispers has faded into cool marble silence. You're safe now in your room, your bed, your time. The torches along the colonnade flicker just once more before sleep claims them. That distant sea, the one you kept watching, it still waits. It always will. It doesn't demand anything. Not presence, not answers, just awareness. You've made it through the endless corridors of formality, the glances behind curtains, the hands tugging gently at your sleeve, and now, there's only breath. You don't need to perform. You don't need to know what comes next. The procession has passed, and the petals have scattered. The silence you used to fear is now the very thing holding you. Let it wrap around you like dusk. Let your mind drift the way parchment curls beside flame. You've heard the stories now. You've seen the hidden rooms, the quiet rebellions, the truths dressed in silk, and still you're here, whole. No more veils, no more mirrors, just a stillness that belongs only to you. Sleep well.